Now it's very much my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Roger Lanctot from Strategy Analytics. Roger is Director of Automotive Connected Mobility in the Global Automotive Practice at Strategy Analytics. He's the automotive analyst who I follow most closely and most regularly because, in my opinion, he's got some really good data, some really good insights into what that data means, and some provocative opinions about what's happening and why. So very happy to have Roger here. Roger, thank you very much for squeezing us into your schedule, and welcome.
And thank you for that generous introduction, Jeff, and thanks to Phil, Brian, and Elizabeth as well for getting me here. I do have to dash out of here after my presentation, but I last spoke to the Embedded Vision Alliance, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, so I don't know if I said something wrong or didn't deliver the goods, but I was, in the interim, my colleague Ian Riches, who is more specialized in this area, he did speak to this organization, and I guess I've been brought back from the cold. But I am focused more on the application of these technologies, as my responsibility is connected mobility, so the application of vision systems into cars to enable autonomy and these kinds of applications. So I don't mean to suggest, and neither does Jeff, I'm sure, that automotive is the most important application area. However, I would argue that it's a pretty important one, particularly for the wireless industry, because most of the new connections of devices are coming from cars today, actually. It's a massive growth market for the wireless industry. And automakers themselves are struggling with that. And bringing together the vision piece with the connection is the transformative piece that we're looking at ultimately in autonomy. So I'm going to be sharing data with you. Not every market analyst is sharing, but we have the sharing economy today, so I'm going to share with you our forecasts and insights. If you need more detail on this, feel free to reach out to me. It's very easy to find me. I've got 13,500 LinkedIn connections and 50,000 Twitter followers. I have 170,000 people following my blogs on LinkedIn, which is where Jeff is finding my provocative opinions about these technologies and how we're applying them or misapplying them. But hopefully, the ultimate objective is we're saving lives, at least in the automotive industry. So I'll talk about ADAS market outlook and overview and status, and why it's so important, or why I think it's so important, why we at Strategy Analytics think it's important, and then the autonomous vehicle market dynamics, which are critical to understand. And then some conclusions, and maybe there'll be time for Q&A. But as I said, if I am not able to answer questions today, I'm very easy to find and happy to follow up with you. So ADAS market outlook. So what's going on is what I'd like to call the Cambrian explosion is hitting the automotive industry. So what is the Cambrian explosion? As I'm sure many of you already know, it's the fact that 543 million years ago, there were 3 animal phyla, and 538 million years ago, there were 38 animal phyla. So in 5 million years, 35 phyla originated. There is one hypothesis, which is described in the book Driverless, which I recommend, that's called the light switch theory by Andrew Parker, which holds that the evolution of eyes initiated an evolutionary arms race. So we went from seeing just shadows to actually, greater perception, and not just sight, but other senses as well. And notes that armed with a visual system, a responsive body, and a bigger brain, what were once blobs of cells evolved into a diverse set of complex creatures that crawled out of the primordial ooze. And so this is the book. I recommend it. And this theory has also been expressed by Masayoshi Son, just talking about the IoT industry. Again, sensory enhancement, creating an explosion in life forms in the Cambrian period, but in products in our industries. So ADAS is the big beneficiary for this sensorification of cars, if you will, and there are quite a wide range of sensors in the car. But the best combination of growth sizes and distance warning, with automatic emergency braking either becoming mandated in European markets or strongly recommended in the US. They haven't required it, but they've sort of coerced the industry into agreeing to build in automatic emergency braking. And if you watch football or anything on TV today, you're going to see cars stopping for pedestrians, cars stopping for other cars. This is new. And this is technology that was originally envisioned for wireless, DSRC, B2B communication. Well, we're doing it with cameras, actually, today, in cars that are being sold to the masses. Other emerging systems, camera mirror replacement, so where you'd have a little stalk instead of a big mirror, because they actually have very significant data about the wind resistance from mirrors, but that's not going to be a huge opportunity. So this is also leading to a massive market for a central ADAS processor in the car. It's largely a premium segment proposition today, but it is coming down market slowly, and this is why you have this battle emerging between Renesas, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, Intel over that brain in the car. So just like the Cambrian explosion created a need for greater processing power in organisms, cars need more processing power, and what they're bringing together is the infotainment side of the house and the safety side of the house. Now this has broader implications because we don't have the right network in the car. We have this CAN network or FlexRay or MOST. Essentially Ethernet is coming into the car, but I won't talk about that today. So ultrasonic is not going away. Longer range, higher resolution is coming. LiDAR, the greatest percentage increase in 2022 demand, massive M&A and investment activity. It's worth noting that Intel acquired Mobileye, of course, and there are very significant positioning statements about camera versus LiDAR in the car. So camera technology is being distributed en masse across vehicles through all segments. LiDAR, we famously see usually on these autonomous vehicles, Waymo, Ford, whatever, on test vehicles primarily, although Waymo is beginning to get into a kind of a commercial proposition, but an autonomous vehicle led around and ushered around with LiDAR technology, okay? So typically you're looking at a very expensive piece of equipment that you're probably not going to own. That's going to be a public transportation resource, whereas camera technology is available to the masses and is being applied for, I'll say, semi-autonomous driving. Radar, so radar being used in combination with camera technology. In camera technology in the automotive market, we're moving to higher resolutions, 8 megapixel in the pipeline for forward-looking cameras, and more use of machine vision technology in areas where not commonly applied, like parking, surround view systems. Again, if you see the advertisements on TV, you're seeing Ford advertising self-parking systems. I mean, I think we were looking at these ads 7 or 8 years ago as well from Lexus, but they're coming down into the mass market now. Almost taken for granted, if you will. Growing increase in centralized architectures and processing of raw data. Again, a more powerful processor, and to justify the cost of that processor, having virtual machines so you can have it handling multiple application areas in the car that car makers typically would not normally want to merge onto the same processor. You know, normally a car company would want to have a dedicated area to the infotainment system and keep it away from safety. These are coming together in order to share that powerful resource. And there are power consumption implications as well. We still expect all of camera, LiDAR, radar to prosper and grow, and there will be no single winner. So even in Intel and Mobileye's expression of the key role of the camera, they still see a role for kind of a lower resolution LiDAR, not a spinning device on top of the car or even a solid state, just a low res, less expensive module in the car for purpose-built applications to fill in where the camera cannot completely apprehend the context of where the car is driving. But camera growth is significant, and it's the core growth area for ADAS. Estimate of 11 million cameras used in trifocal modules, 3.7 million modules in 2024. Fastest growth through 2021 in stereo and internal cameras, and fastest growth through 2024 in trifocal cameras. So not only are we adding cameras to the car, we're also adding cameras in the car. And again, it's important to understand if you look at what the messaging that's going to be coming from Intel and Mobileye, they want to have that single front-facing camera, but they want that connected. Okay, so in a lot of their messaging, they make it sound as if it's assumed that it's going to be connected. Most cars do not have the safety system connected to the CAN bus, so that's a step that has to happen architecturally in the car. But once that's done, that's opening the door to an even more powerful proposition for an enhanced mapping solution to enable the autonomous driving. So that front-facing camera isn't just going to be helping you avoid collisions and helping you park. it's going to be helping you drive more autonomously entirely. Radar growth is also significant. So this is working in concert with the camera technology for these applications: blind spot detection, distance warning, front corner alert, parking. So the broader picture is that these are sort of helping applications to help you drive more safely. Now, of course, the safer you make it to drive a vehicle, the more dangerously people tend to drive them. But I think we're on a path here of education, and it's all on part of this evolution towards autonomy on the backs of processing power and sensor application. So the LiDAR market, now, LiDAR is a very detailed area that I am not intimately familiar with. I'm more focused on the connected mobility side of things, so the ultimate application that's enabled and derived from these technologies. My colleague Ian Riches could discuss LiDAR chapter and verse with you, but I think it's important to note that simple LiDAR, lower cost, is going to continue to play a major role even as we see solid state, higher resolution LiDAR systems coming into cars. And that would more likely be that the high res would more likely be in the luxury segment where you can justify that kind of a cost in the vehicle. Market is still emerging. Many technologies are not mature. So there's a lot of startup, there's a lot of investment in this area. So this is where my expertise completely disappears, but I'll share these thoughts from Ian with you. These are his slides. So many questions remain about LiDAR, about what kind of light source, how many beams, single or multi-shot, is it eye safe, beam steering. These exceed the familiarity of an English major. So I will just share them with you, and you will have a PDF version of these slides. And as I said, if you want to dig in, Ian would be happy to dig in with you. But sensing and processing. And processing, it is a major area of, as I said, these big SoC players are really, jostling with one another in the marketplace right now about the messaging. And I expect some significant statements at the Consumer Electronics Show. So there was an NDA briefing from Intel with Mobileye just a few weeks ago. And I can say one of the slides that was shared at that briefing was shared at the LA Auto Show, the Automobility LA event last week. And so the messaging from that slide was that Intel has a cost to performance advantage, a significant one over NVIDIA. And of course, they're pushing a camera-based approach to solving this problem. So expect a big statement and a big play from Intel around vision and enabling autonomous driving at the CES show. So what's happening in the autonomous vehicle market? So when is a car not a car? If we talk about autonomous cars, it's very amusing to me because frequently people talk about consumers are afraid of autonomous cars or afraid of cars operating in an autonomous fashion, or is the car going to kill the old lady or run over the dog, or who's going to buy these cars? And I think it's worth noting that actually I'm not sure how many people are going to or even would or even be able to afford a fully autonomous vehicle. If the vehicle is fully autonomous, chances are it's probably a pretty expensive piece of kit that's enabling that proposition. So you just want to get that car on demand. You don't want to own this car. But that's me. Maybe I'm missing something, and maybe I don't understand, but that's my thought. I think I wouldn't mind owning a semi-autonomous car, and Tesla has demonstrated people are interested in owning a semi-autonomous car where you have kind of a geo-fenced autonomy. So if Tesla had geo-fenced that technology with autopilot, we wouldn't have had that fatality in Florida last year, okay? And shortly after that happened, they did geo-fence, and they still do geo-fence. And in fact, GM is using geofencing of their Super Cruise technology. So they used LiDAR to scan the roads at very high resolution to enable GM's Super Cruise solution, which has a driver camera, so it's monitoring to make sure you're paying attention to the road. And I like to say GM has rewritten the Jim Morrison song. Instead of keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel, GM is saying, as long as your eyes are on the road, you can take your hands off the wheel, okay? I think it's a provocative statement and value proposition, which I think is appealing to some people, but you still can't read the newspaper, okay? You have to be paying attention. So, but we're going to see different kinds of vehicles in this Cambrian explosion, some of which we may want to own, some of which we may share, some of which we may just summon when we want to get somewhere. It's also worth bearing in mind what we're coping with in the automotive industry, which is, if you look at the wireless industry, the product life cycles are, I don't know, 6 months or so, something like that, maybe even less. And so you can see a company just be almost completely erased in a period of a year or two. Whereas in the automotive industry, we get all this noise about Tesla, and yet teeny tiny market share, tiny market, massive valuation, and minimal sales. Okay, so big headline impact, but they're not moving a lot of vehicles. But their influence is the fact that they approached this problem of vehicles from a white sheet kind of a angle. They just said, look, okay, CAN bus, that's ridiculous. We're going to do Ethernet. We're going to do a lot of this stuff in-house. We're not going to use the usual automotive supply chain, and we're going to do what we think should be done, as opposed to the way things have always been done. And they've radically shaken up the industry, and the industry is still struggling to cope with the changes that they have brought. So what are the ecosystem challenges in the automotive industry? So what Tesla has introduced is end user revenue from fully automated driving is zero. So why are we spending all these billions of dollars for nothing? What's the deal? This market of zero is reshaping the entire value chain. Okay, so we're spending billions of dollars, but we don't know whether we're going to get any of this back. What's going on? So the biggest challenge is for tier one suppliers. Automakers, they're looking to startups and non-traditional suppliers for innovation and developing their own IP and solutions, separation of hardware and software, integration of hardware and software no longer only done by the tier one, but also by the OEM and engineering services partners. So we get asked these questions all the time. How much of the content in the car is deriving from software? Nobody really knows, because it's never really been accounted for in the industry. And nevertheless, car companies are hiring hundreds, if not thousands, of engineers and opening offices near universities, Austin, Georgia, Silicon Valley. The car makers opening offices in Tel Aviv, in Israel, throughout Germany to capture this talent, because they just can't find enough people to do this. And they're bringing a lot of this activity in-house. So they're not strictly relying on the tier one players, who themselves are struggling with this disruption. So how can those tier ones add value? How can they keep pace when ultimately they're competing with all the IT companies at the end of the day? And how can the semi-vendors enable them in this, while also advancing their competitive position? So one thing I will say, I avoided the strategy analytics commercial, but I will say one of our deepest subscription bases in the industry for industry insights and such is the semiconductor industry. So certainly we serve the car makers and tier ones, software companies, et cetera, the wireless carriers, but the semiconductor companies are using our data and trying to make sense of this and understand. And as I said, the SoC companies are beginning to step forward and play a much more critical role in defining these systems and the enabling technologies that will bring this to market. So traditionally, if you were a car company, you would go out to a tier one. The tier one would, take on that liability, which is a significant question when you're talking about safety systems in the car. Are you going to take responsibility if something goes horribly wrong? So now we have more of a network, not a supply chain. Okay, and everything is being disrupted, and the car maker is suddenly becoming secondary as opposed to being the one completely in charge. And this looks nice and clean and clever. This is really disturbing in the automotive industry to look at it this way, because the car companies like to think of themselves in charge, and they're literally being thrown around by these emerging technologies, and they are losing control, basically, of this situation. And again, piling billions of dollars into the market for a return that may or may not come. But there's a feeling that we have to take on this opportunity. We need to enable our cars to be more intelligent and drive more safely. We need to put these sensors on and put that kind of intelligence in there, and change the networking, and change the power management in the car, and change the storage issues, and build back-end systems and add connectivity. It's a major disruption for the industry. So there are two paths to this goal. So we talk about the path from ADAS to autonomy, and this is what I think we are all thinking of, that step by step we're slowly going to get there, and eventually, hey, we'll have an autonomous car and everything will be delightful. The problem is there are so many things changing simultaneously that this incremental approach is not going to work, because maybe you fix the connectivity side and then get the processing wrong and the storage isn't right and you haven't changed the network in the car. Tesla just changed everything because they just went from a white sheet of paper. And so this is what they're up against, because we're also simultaneously dealing with electrification, which takes out a major cost barrier to the entry of third-party organizations, if you're talking about electrification. So it's a struggle, and this is unresolved yet. It's not clear what's going to happen. You have people talking about dealers are going to go away, car brands aren't going to manage anymore, aren't going to mean anything anymore, and people, consumers responding to surveys saying, well, I'd be more trusting of an autonomous vehicle, from an Apple or a Google or somebody like that. I'm not as comfortable getting an autonomous vehicle from a Ford or a GM or a Toyota. And in fact, those companies, in spite of what you may be reading or may have read, they're pretty far behind the 8-ball, those car companies. Although I guess that there was a headline this morning, Nissan saying 2022. I was moderating a panel yesterday outside Washington where the GM executive was saying they expect to have an autonomous vehicle service not unlike Waymo in 2019. Now, presumably that's going to be based on cruise automation, which is more of a so they're making use of LiDAR there. And so again, not an owned vehicle, some kind of a service. So one of the core issues, it's not a core issue for the embedded vision community per se, but you might be surprised, is the mapping question. What kind of a map do we need for autonomous driving? People say the HERE map is pretty much a navigational map. And so they're saying, well, we're working on an HD map, but a lot of the people I talk to in the industry say either HERE's the only one who can do this, or HERE is incapable of doing this, and what they're doing is irrelevant. Okay, we need a different kind of a map. And to build that map, we're most likely going to be leveraging vision technology, okay, camera technology in the car. So these are the companies that are working in this kind of area. In fact, the reason why I have to dash out of here is because this company, Usher, is a client, and they have an investor event that I have to present on. But the companies that are most prominent are Civil Maps and Deep Map. They're trying to build kind of a live, build it on the fly kind of a map experience in the car, again, to enable autonomous driving, to build that context, again, on the fly in real time, because road conditions change. The navigation map isn't really good enough to help you enable an autonomous vehicle. But these are some of the organizations that are trying to solve this challenge. So what does all this mean? So outside of the connected car, most electronics growth is coming from ADAS and autonomous. From a standpoint of electronics, so at Strategy Analytics, we're forecasting the adoption of the electronics in vehicles. So the electrification of cars is another source of major demand in the marketplace, but ADAS has broader implications for the masses of cars. There are significant challenges for the car makers around automating cars, particularly because the market it's unclear what that market's going to be. Is that a service? We're probably not selling these cars per se. We can sell those cars that are incrementing their way to autonomy, but the cars that are autonomous today, that's a different value proposition. So our car company is going to become transportation as a service. The mass market 2020 challenge is not level 4, but ADAS and or level 2. So you'll hear talk about level 3, which is the, be ready to take control of the car. That's really, people talk about level 3, but there are very few car companies trying to deliver a level 3 experience. And almost everything you hear about today is level 2, with the possible exception of Waymo. The emergence of new value network, which I described on that slide, car makers will need to manage this transition. Simultaneously more important compared to existing automotive supply base, but less important as the industry digitizes. New entrants typically have large cash piles generated in other industries. So they have leverage that they're bringing to bear from other from other industries within the automotive space. And they have platforms. So this is the challenge for the automakers is how do I create a platform where I can ingest this data from my cameras to build value propositions, either for service delivery or for generating revenue. So, but before they will be able to do that, so this is early days, they need to get the right network in the car. CAN bus really is not the right network. They need an Ethernet, and that's going to take some time, and we forecast and analyze that as well. And we're going to need to connect the network to the camera, to the safety system in the car. And oh, by the way, this raises significant cybersecurity concerns. So you see, everywhere the car makers turn, it's conflict, struggle, and terror. In fact, next week I'll be at the Auto ISAC meeting in Detroit at their annual summit, where they're struggling to deal with these issues, and there's no silver bullet for cybersecurity either. That's a process, as many of you know, for cybersecurity. It's an ongoing process. It's not going to be solved overnight. So what does this mean to me, to you? The need for safety drives sensor adoption, cameras. More cameras means more information data and more software. As an industry, we need to build a compelling cross-OEM platform to ingest and aggregate and normalize data, sensor data, from multiple OEMs to create value propositions to enable connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle solutions down the road. Cameras are the key to this, but all these other little pieces have to fall into place. So the good news is it's early days, plenty of opportunity. More data and software, need for faster in-vehicle network throughput and software updates and security. We are going to have to update those algorithms in the car, so we're going to need to have connectivity. Car companies still to this day can't stand connectivity. I like to say wireless carriers don't understand car companies, and car companies can't stand wireless carriers. And now we're talking about 5G. And I don't know if some of you know, AT&T turned off their 2G networks. That hit Ford, BMW, and Nissan. And now Verizon's talking about turning off their 2G network, which is going to affect millions of cars from GM, Daimler, Hyundai, and Toyota that were all on that 2G network. And now we're talking about 5G. But we are talking about some forward compatibility from LTE release 14 through, so maybe they'll figure this thing out. Need for software updates, security, need for connectivity, connected and increasingly autonomous car equals mobility as a service. Again, industry transformation. Mobility as a service equals new forms of customer acquisition, interaction, engagement, maybe retention. And what I like to call the Cambrian explosion. Okay, that's about right. That's about the right reaction. Okay, that's good. You got it right. So, and I'll just conclude to say we all know who this is. Jensen at NVIDIA, and just showing that, so they're talking about 25 of their 225 programs that they have, 25 of them are robotaxis. So suddenly, it wasn't so long ago that NVIDIA was talking about sexy infotainment systems in the dashboard and digital instrument clusters and bringing all that together. Well, they've done a complete shift over to robotaxis. So our leather-jacketed friend is making robotaxis cool, and cameras are going to play a big role in that. So those are my thoughts. Thank you very much.